Hey everybody, it's Dr. Dan. Just wanted to go over a couple things based on our last video with mono and people being confused about getting mono more than once. It is a confusing topic. So first, a little background. Epstein-Barr virus is in the family of herpes viruses, which include herpes simplex, varicella zoster or chickenpox, CMV or cytomegalovirus, and Epstein-Barr virus. So the herpes viruses do something specific. They infect you, and then they live in you. And your body does a good job of keeping them in like prison. So if we go over those herpes viruses, for instance, herpes simplex virus, which causes cold sores, once you get it, it lives in a nerve root and hangs out there until you get stressed, tired, or a cold. When you get a cold, you get a cold sore because the herpes virus comes back out and reactivates. You don't get a new infection. Chickenpox or varicella does something similar, but it kind of sits in jail, biding its time, waiting for its revenge, and then you're somewhere in your 40s and you get shingles. Shingles is this painful rash that occurs over one part of your body, like the shingles on a roof. So then we get to Epstein-Barr virus. Epstein-Barr virus lives inside your white blood cells once it infects you and you had the initial case of mono. But your body does a really good job of keeping it away. It's hard to reactivate it unless your immune system is completely shut down. So why do people think they got it again? Well, interestingly, that's because of the way we test for Epstein-Barr virus. We don't actually look for the virus. The most common test is what's called a monospot or heterophile antibody test. In the heterophile antibody test, if someone has mono, the antibodies that are created make the red blood cells sticky, and they actually stick to a little card. And that shows that you could have mono. But there's a lot of things that can make that test positive, including mycoplasma infections and other viruses even, including cytomegalovirus. So even though that test is positive, it may not be Epstein-Barr virus that's causing it. In fact, the gold standard test is another set of antibody tests called titers that look for the presence of antibodies to the Epstein-Barr virus. In those tests, you can actually distinguish between past infection and current infection. That's a little deeper than we need to go in this talk. That's the reason I knew Bria had it in the past. She had one of the past antibodies present. So you don't get a new infection, but the question comes up, can you reactivate the virus? So while people get those new infective symptoms like sore throat and puffy neck like Bria did, that doesn't mean it was mono. But if you test her, you can find antibodies or a positive monospot, which is the most common test. So you think, oh my God, I got reinfected again, or it got reactivated. But again, that's really rare. Basically, your immune system has to be almost completely shut down, like in cases of cancer or chemotherapy. But it doesn't mean that it couldn't have happened to some of you, because not all viruses read the textbook. Now, some of you said that you had mono, like when you're 16, and then you got sick again right after that. That actually does happen. That's called a relapse. And relapse happen within the first month or two after an infection. That's much more common than actual reactivation. But I'm going to bet you, a lot of you that said you had mono once when you were 4, and then again when you were 26, just had a positive monospot and were told it was mono again, when in fact it was just that the antibodies were found and you were sick at the time. This is why it's really important to share with your doctor, no matter that you're in an urgent care, an emergency room, or with your adult physician, your entire history. If you told a doctor in an urgent care you had mono once when you were 4, they probably wouldn't even test for it again. The final thing about Epstein-Barr virus is important is that it's implicated in a lot of chronic illnesses too. There are actually links to lymphoma, to multiple sclerosis, and something called MECFS, or chronic fatigue syndrome. The connection is poorly understood, and it's not a direct link, but they're looking to it all the time. In fact, it's much more prevalent now since COVID. There's a lot of co-infections where they believe the COVID virus actually causes more reactivation of mono than other times in the past. So there may be a link between long COVID and chronic fatigue syndrome, which interestingly enough have very similar symptoms. If you're someone who suffers from chronic fatigue syndrome or long COVID, a good place to look is the RECOVER study. This is where a lot of research on long COVID is being done today. So you can see why this is so confusing. We don't even test for the virus itself. 6'7".